The stadium stands silent. The battlefield awaits. Shadows stir, legends awaken. Tonight, the clash begins. Join the Night Watch and let's sim the battle and rule the night together. Welcome to Night Night Sims. Welcome back to the channel, everyone. This is Night Night here, and before we kick off the slider and settings video for CPU versus CPU slow sim in Madden 26, I want to actually take you behind the curtain. This isn't just about random settings and sliders like most videos you're seeing out there. It's about building a realistic football world, an iconic and realistic one. Every slider I've tuned, every setting I've tested, and it's all designed to make your CPU versus CPU franchise feel like a realistic game day. It's fully alive. So let's walk through what I'm calling the franchise sanctum. It's the foundation of everything you've wanted to see in a Madden slow simulation franchise for years. So real quick, make sure you drop a like, don't forget to comment how the sliders helped your franchise, share this video with friends, and don't forget to subscribe to join the Night Watch, where we sim the battle and rule the night together. Now without further ado, let's jump right in. So first thing we're going to go over is I'm going to show you the schemes that I've been using for all my testings and the auto subs. So for the schemes, I've been using the Vikings and going against, almost every team in the NFL. For offensive scheme, I've been majorly testing West Coast Zone Run. I have tested all of them, but this is the offensive scheme I've got the most testing under. And for the defensive scheme, it's the 3-4 under. Again, I've tested all of them, but this is the one I tend to prefer. This is how I like to run, especially with the Vikings. It just feels right to me. And I do use the team-specific playbooks when I do my testings. Alright, so next thing, let's go ahead and jump into our auto subs. So auto subs, obviously you have QB sub in at 1, QB sub out at 0. You're not going to have your backup coming in the middle of the third quarter just because of fatigue or whatever the case is. It's realistic. For proper halfback rotations, especially with almost every team doing one by committee now, I do have halfback sub in at 92, sub out at 84. You'll even see a third stringer in there on a rare occasion. It's only for a handful of carries at most, but it does get that realistic committee and rotation in there. For wide receivers, sub in at 80, sub out at 70. Fullbacks and tight ends, in at 75, out at 65. You will see 3 tight ends playing if you have 3 tight ends on your roster, especially if you're using play sheets, stuff like that. That's another thing. When I do my testings, I do it with no play sheets, none of the traits, no nothing. It's completely blank. That way, when you add those in there, it feels like that bonus, where you're game planning, and it's, it adds that extra layer to realism. So like I said, this is all base, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here in just a second. Offensive line, sub in at 1, sub out at 0. No, unless they're injured, the offensive line stays in. For defense, this is also, defenses have proper rotations as well. So for defensive tackles, you're going to sub in at 92, sub out at 82. Edges are going to sub in at 90, sub out at 82. Linebackers in at 75, out at 65. Cornerbacks are going to sub in at 70, out at 60, and same for the safeties, in at 70, out at 60. And then what I was talking about is when you go into weekly strategy and the staff abilities, I don't have staff abilities, the play sheets, or trainer abilities active when I'm doing my testings. So what I do is I literally go in on every single game that I do, and I just go in and I uncheck all of them, and then I just submit it in completely blank, just like that. So I continue with empty slots, and I do that for all of it, because when you're doing all these, it's supposed to be, team specific. You're doing it specifically for the team that you're playing against to try to get that edge. And that's, the only way to really simulate that is to where the settings and sliders are set for the base, and then you add in all this stuff, because when you're playing other teams, they have different ones. You're not going to have the same staff abilities, same play sheet, same trainer abilities for every team every single game. You're going to change them up, the other teams are going to change them up. So that's why I do it like this. So I will go in, I confirm the loadout, and then I come in to here. So what I have done with my fatigue settings and everything, and I'll show you all that here in just a second as well, is on offense, you can actually go in and do player by player or by the team. So you can actually go down, and if you want, you can press X, if you're on XX or whatever, and change this. So what I've done is if they're down to 3 or 4 bars, I will do half pads. If they're below 3 bars, or sometimes even if they're 3 bars, I'll rest. Otherwise, I keep them at full pads. Now, you adjust that based off of how you want, but that's kind of what I do when I go player by player while I'm doing it, and I'll just go down. So it's week 1 here, or preseason, so nobody's got anything yet. But once it's done, that's when I'll go and I'll stimulate training. I do CPU versus CPU, so I don't do any of the training camp, any of the trainings, any of that. I do everything. I let everything sim. I control where it goes, stuff like that. But that's it. So now that we've got that covered, what we can go ahead and do is we can go over our franchise settings. We'll go over league settings first. So skill level, you're going to have it all pro. Game style simulation. I use classic Madden meter for kick meter style. Quarter length, you're going to want it 12 minutes with accelerated clock on and a minimum play clock time at 20. This will give you that 110 to 120-ish plays per game, which is perfect for NFL realism. That's where the I think the average right now recently is 116, if I remember correctly. But it's the ideal amount. For cooldowns and limits, you don't need them on. I haven't seen too many plays getting repeated consistently like we have in previous Maddens, so I have left that off. For season experience, obviously you do as you want, but I do everything manual. Auto progress players, ability weekly recap and tutorials I have off. Trade deadline is on. Trade difficulty is normal because I do my own trades in my franchises sensible. I go through PFF and different things, and I make sure that they're fair values, if not me losing, so to speak. Salary cap is on. Free agent motivation impact I do have on high. I do want it to be realistic where there are those players that are going to leave just for money, or just whatever the case may be. So I do have that a little bit higher to make it towards a little bit harder to sign every single person you want. Practice squad stealing is on. Relocations, users only. Wear and tear I have on. I'll go over the wear and tear auto subs. I have a whole separate set specifically for those as well. That helps tie into the fatigue and everything else. So every practice injury, pre-existing, prospect storylines, have all those on. Draft presentation, full draft timer I leave on. Fantasy draft order, I don't do that, so I just leave it standard. For free agent negotiations on stage 1, I do 3. Stage 2 is 5 and stage 3 is unlimited. I do it this way because in real life, they're only targeting a couple key positions or key players usually on the first, when free agency first opens. They're getting those quick fixes that they absolutely need, and that's what they go after. So I don't like this being at the 5 or the 10 or whatever it is. This just feels more realistic to me, so that's why I do it on that. Pre-order bonus I turned off because if using a new coach, that's kind of like a cheat. The whole point of a new coach is to build up from the ground up. Coach firing, you can do whichever you want. I normally do CPU only. That way it keeps cycling. I would do CPU only or on. I wouldn't do it off. As far as career clock, leave on. Breakout scenarios on. Development trait regression, obviously we want on. X factors, I did drop down to 35. I keep it at 35 because I feel like that's kind of like your top 25, so to speak, but I do have a few extras for those ones that are, they just broke out this season, or they've had 4 or 5 really good games and then they level up, different things like that. You have 35 fully dominant players in the NFL, but I don't think we have 75, so to speak, when it comes to really above being a superstar, stuff like that. So kind of that one per team that's maybe some teams have 2, but I like the balance of this, along with superstars being at 100 and star dead being at 400. It doesn't overinflate the league, but it doesn't underinflate it. Superstar abilities are going to be turned on. Edit controls and player edit controls, just to any player, I don't mess with that because you're doing CPU anyway, so it is what it is. I don't edit anything. You do what you want to do. Minimum roster size, 46, minimum game day. In-season player movement limit, I do 4. With player overall cut restrictions at 85, off-season player cut limit at 4, and fill roster is on. So these are the settings that I've done all my testings with. These are the settings that I'm going to be running with my franchise. And so there is that. So now the next thing we're going to do is go over XP sliders. So this is tuned to where position and age tie in together. Running backs will regress more quickly than a quarterback does. You know, your safeties are going to regress depending on what it is. Strong safeties tend to last a little bit longer than free safeties, who tend to, you know, take a little bit more damage, if that's what you want to say, when it comes to contact, hits, blitzes, stuff like that. But let's go ahead and go through this. So quarterbacks I have at 100, halfbacks at 110, tight ends at 130, wide receivers at 120, fullbacks at 60, tackles, guards, and centers are at 130, and that's for your offensive progression XP rate. For defensive progression, I'm going to do edge rushers at 120, defensive tackles at 110, middle linebackers at 130, outside linebackers at 124, cornerbacks at 114, and both safeties at 110. Then for special teams, leave it at base 100 for kickers and punters. And then for age progression, from 20 through 24 is going to be all at 200. That's their prime progression time, you know what I mean? Most players are hitting their primes in that 24 to 27, 28, some into the 29 year age. So that's why I have 200 from 20 to 24, 150 for that little extra bump for some that come into the draft late, stuff like that. So 150 for 25s and 26-year-olds. Your base hundreds from 27, 28, 29, and 30. Then regression really starts to hit, or not regression, but the least amount of progression really starts to hit at 31 and 32, where I have it at 70, 50 for 33 and 34, and then 10 for 35. Every player still gets some progression no matter their age, but obviously the older they get, the less progression they should be making. You know, once they're at 35, they should be retired or close to retirement, so there's not much more progression. They've already hit their prime. They've already become either a Hall of Famer or not. What it is, you know, they're at their max. You've seen what they're capable of doing. So now we go into regression rate. We have quarterbacks at 100, halfbacks at 120, tight ends at 110, wide receivers at 100, fullbacks at 80, tackles at 110, guards at 100, centers at 90. So again, this is all based off positions. Centers, they have to deal with those heavy nose tackles a lot more frequently than guards and tackles. Whereas tackles, they tend to, you know, they're trying to prevent the DNs from setting edges or just protecting the blind side. I don't feel like, you know, they don't take as much, or they don't have as little regression as the centers do, but it's not, you know, the guards. The guards to me have the least amount of game-to-game damage, I guess. I mean, I don't know how else to say it for everybody to understand, but to me, tackles have to deal with the most. You know, they've got to be quicker off, stuff like that. They're more of the finesse type, so to speak, whereas your centers, they're dealing with those nose tackles. Guards, you've got guards that pull. You've got guards that are just pass protecting guards. You've got guards that excel at the run, you know, whereas, you know, tackles, if you don't have a good solid left tackle to guard that blind side, they're worthless. So for me, they take more of an impact in regression over time, and they regress quicker than a guard or a center would, if that makes sense. Now on to defensive regression rate. Sorry if my voice sounds off. I've been sick for several days now while I've been working and everything and trying to do all this. So if my voice sounds a little off or I sound congested, that is why I have been sick for a couple of days now. But back to this. So edge rushers we have at 120, D tackles at 110, middle linebackers at 110, outside linebackers at 120, corners at 100, free safeties at 90, strong safeties at 100. For special teams, kickers and punters tend to have long careers, so I have 80 and 80 for them. Now for ages, I have it to where it really starts to kick in their 30s, rather than how Madden's been in the past, where at 26, 27 regression hits. And, you know, I don't want players retiring at 27 years old, but I also don't want anything, you know, I don't want it to where there's no 33-year-olds in the league. You know, I want that solid progression and regression thing, and that's what I've gotten with doing it the way I have. So at 26, you're at 50, 27 at 60, 28 at 70, 29 at 80, 30 is at 90, 31's at 100, and now regression really starts to ramp up. 120 at 32, 150 at 33, 180 at 34, and 200 at 35 plus. So when you combine all of these into their multiplicative states for the formulas and stuff that they use in the backgrounds, I don't have the table right in front of you. There's a table, but it makes it to where, you know, you have negative progressions when you get later on down the road as far as years. So it's built to work, but at the same time, if that player is that important to the team or it breaks out or has a really strong year, they're not just going to drop off of a cliff like they have in previous Maddens. All right, so that is your XP sliders. We've gone over the auto subs. We've gone over everything else. So now it's time to hit the most important part of the franchise settings, and that is the gameplay sliders. So first up, we have QB accuracy. So I do player skill and CPU skill. I make them both the same. And I do that because I don't think there's supposed to be any changes, but when I've had them different, I don't get the same type of results and stats that I did when I have them the same. Now, I don't know if it's just a coincidence, but it does seem like it changes when they don't match. Like I said, it might just be a coincidence on a few games that I've done that for, but just to safeguard, I do it like this. So again, first up, we have QB accuracy. This one's huge. So I've got this set at 49. That's the sweet spot where throws feel earned. You're going to see realistic lasers, some dimes, some misses, but you're also going to see some of those wobblers, those overthrows, and just enough of those panic passes and chaos under pressure when the pocket collapses. You drop this down to like 47 or below, the QB starts holding the ball like he's waiting for divine intervention. Like it's just ridiculous. The sack rate spikes, the drive stall consistently and too frequently. It doesn't work well. You raise it up to 51 and above, and it's like watching a space laser beam show all day. It's just laser beams all day long. It's just too clean. Completion percentages creep into the 80s regularly, not just the one-off like the Josh Allen on a rare occasion or Lamar's or, those all-star quarterbacks that do at times have those 80% games. But it's not regularly. And every throw just doesn't feel scripted. At 49, traits like clutch and ideal under pressure actually matter now as well. So you'll also see QB step up in big moments, or they're going to fold when the heat's on. And that's the drama we want. That's real life, That QB either steps up in those big moments and, hits those deep shots or whatnot, or he crumbles. And that's what you see now with this. With pass blocking, this is where the trenches come to life. Okay, I've got it locked in at 88 as the sweet spot. It gives a QB just enough time to breathe, but it's not enough for them to take a nap on the field. You lower it too much below that, edge rushers, they just start feasting. It's sacks all day. Raise it too much, and you lose the tension that you want in a game where, you see those close ones or those QB pressures, those QB hits. And this slider, it directly affects the sack rates. It directly affects like deep ball timing, how often your QB panics. And it also allows it, with it at 88, I'm seeing traits like high motor and the bull rush dominate when that wall cracks. But when that wall holds, you see those iconic moments of deep shots, clutch throws, and drives that feel earned. They're not just given away. Down to wide receiver catching, it's at 55. Gives you a nice mix of toe taps, drops in traffic, but you don't really see none of those weird magnet-like catches that were like just crazy before. It's still high enough that it lets traits like aggressive catch and possession catch actually show up, but it's still low enough that contested throws still feel risky at times. And that's what you want. You set it any lower, your receivers start playing volleyball. It's just all over the place, tips everywhere. And they're dropping things consistently. You set it any higher, we might as well just be playing Madden 16 all over again. It's just insane. I want every catch to feel like a decision. Did the quarterback trust this guy? Did the defensive back make a good play? That's where the magic lives. That's what you want to see. So now run blocking, we have that set at 58. Now this slider took some time to dial in, but here it gives you that 4 to 5.5 yards per carry range. It's something that feels like a real NFL ground game. It's enough to let the run game breathe without turning every halfback into Barry Sanders. The lanes open up just enough. You're going to see your second level blocks. You'll see your edges getting sealed, but you'll also see some beautiful looking zone runs. But it's not like everything's guaranteed. Nothing's guaranteed. And you do see traits like lead blocker and pull blocker actually show up and shine in the trenches, and they matter now. You drop the slider lower, and your backs are going to get swallowed. You raise it too high, and you break the game. This is where trench realism, where yards are earned and they're not freebies. Okay, now let's get into ball security that I have set at 50. So it's the realism line with this tension slider. So you're going to see fumbles when guys are tired or when they get popped clean or when they're fighting for extra yards, but it's not going to feel random. It's an earned fumble. If you want fewer cough-ups, you can bump it up to 51 or 52, but I like the tension at 50. It makes it to where it feels like every hit counts. And then traits like brace for hits and cover ball, you actually see them showing up. You see guys protect the rock late in games, or when you see them gamble for yardage, they pay the price. That's NFL storytelling at its finest when it comes to, ball security. Now for pass defense reaction time, this one was the most sneaky one of all, and it's sneaky important. Like, it's highly important. At 42, 43, defensive backs, they react realistically to the ball in the air. They don't like psychic break routes or auto break the routes that wide receivers are trying to run. But they'll still make plays if they're in position. Now, if you go higher with the slider, QBs start hesitating, and that leads to the sack spike issues that everybody was having. You go lower, coverage gets too soft. This slider actually affects a lot more than people realize. It affects like the SWAT logic, pick timing, how aggressive your defensive backs play, and it's directly related to the QB hesitation when they're throwing the ball or not throwing the ball. So, it's a big deal. It's a lot more important than people realize. And then traits like play ball aggressive, things like that, they actually matter now with this set at 42, 43. It's a difference between a clean breakup and a game-changing interception. Now, speaking of interceptions, we have them set to 28. This actually keeps picks realistically earned, and it's not gifted. You're still going to see momentum swings, but it's not going to feel like every tipped ball is turning into a turnover. Balls will get tipped and they're going to hit the ground. It's not going to be an automatic interception just because they're tipped. Now, it does make it where traits like ball hawk and secure catch will now dominate when the ball is truly contested, which is how it should be. This slider also affects how often defensive backs go for the swat versus the pick. So you're going to see more swats than consistent picks. It's subtle, but it changes everything about the game, really, when it comes to that. Pass coverage is another sneaky important one. I have this set at 49, and it's the perfect balance point. It's tight enough where they still challenge throws, but it's loose enough to where it keeps the QBs from freezing. You drop it to 48 if you want more shootouts, but then you need to be ready for inflated completion percentages because it's going to shoot up. This slider, it affects separation, kind of route mirroring when it comes to defensive backs, and the integrity of the zone, or other people might just know it as zone integrity. It helps traits like man coverage and zone coverage actually show up when it's tuned correctly, which is at that 49. It actually makes it to where it's like a chess match slider where every move matters on the field. And then tackling, we've got that at 48. You're going to get your wrap-ups, you're going to get your gang tackles, and you'll get some highlight runs. I've had ones where they're leaping over defenders, they're trucking through someone, then spin moving over someone else, but then they spin move right into what looks like a hit stick tackle. It's not a hit stick fast, but it's not flag football either. Traits like big hitter and secure tackler show up when it's tuned correctly, and it balances risk and reward. This one also affects injury risk, pursuit angles, and how often guys bounce off of contact. It's the slider that, when tuned correctly, it makes every collision feel real. Okay, so now we'll drop down to special teams. Field goal power at 55. You're going to see those longer field goals. I've seen as high up as a 58-yarder attempted so far, and I've seen misses. I've had 2 misses in a game with I want to say it was Chicago, that missed 2 50-plus yarders, but then in a game against Baltimore hit 2 52-plus yard field goals. So it's great to see that, and then the accuracy plays right into it at 45. Punt power at 50 and at 48 is good. You're going to see some coffin corners. You're going to see some shanks. And teams like us, as the Vikings, I'm a huge Vikings fan, Skull Vikes, but at the same time, Ryan Wright is not the greatest punter of all. So there are games where my net average for a punt is 38 yards, which is realistic. You shouldn't have every game where it's 50-plus yard net for punts. So this is the perfect setting for that. Kickoff power at 52 makes it to where there are very few touchbacks. We all want to see those kickoffs. I've seen, I think, 2 kickoff returns in my testings for touchdowns. So that is back, but it's not every single play. And the average starting position is between a 15 and a 30, 35. So kind of right in, just like you're seeing in the NFL this year so far. So it's kind of set perfectly. For injuries, we got that at 26. Fatigue at 60. Minimum player speed threshold is at 50. Now for the precipitation sliders, I have this set to reflect the weather, not chaos. Okay, so you're going to have it set at 60 for catch chance, 60 for pass accuracy, 55 for pass strength, 50 for broken tackle, 65 for kicking accuracy, 55 for kicking strength, 60 for slip scale, and then 55 for movement penalties. You're going to see some slips, but not every single play. It kind of everything balances out. Going on to penalties. So, I know in the past a lot of people have commented the roughing the kicker issue. It is an issue. It doesn't happen as often anymore, but you still need to have it on in order to get to the proper amount of penalties per game without overloading specific penalties. Like you're going to have, you might have 4 or 5 holdings in a game between both teams, but you're not going to have 10. But if you turn off, roughing kicker, running into the kicker, you turn off any of these, you're going to inflate other penalties. It doesn't allow the AI logic to work to get to the point that you need it to get at. So you need to have all the penalties on, and then offsides is at 85, false starts at 90, holding is at 60, face mask is at 55, defensive pass interference is at 85, illegal block in the back is at 65, roughing the passer is at 50. I have seen every single penalty in my testing get called at least 3 or 4 times. Every single penalty. I've had games where I've had 0 penalties for both teams. I've had games where there was a total of 12 penalties. But for the most part, it's in that 5 to 7 to 9 range, which is exactly what real life is. Kind of that 3 to 4, per team, 3 to 7 for the rougher teams, that 1 to 4 for the really good disciplined teams. So it lines up good. All right, so that's all those settings, and then I do know some people like to see it, so I will go ahead and back out this and go to the actual settings so you can see what I have set for the main screen. And yes, I'm not editing this, I'm just posting this as you guys see it. So for the game options, again, I set everything here, so All Pro Simulation 12 minutes, and I'm not going to sit here and go over every one of these. You guys can pause it if you want to see anything specifically. But I'm just going to kind of just scroll it down. I have most of the stuff turned off, as you can see. I am going to go over this. Physics-based tackle results, you want it 35. This is imperative. Do not change that. You want it at 35. This goes into everything else. This matters a lot more than people realize. We went over precipitation. For wear and tear, I've got 50s all down the board, except for per timeout I have at 75, per quarter at 75, halftime recovery at 85.
Menu narration set to 100.
Hear that. And then for penalties, we have that set. As you see in all those already, player skill, we've gone over all those, and we've gone over the auto subs. Now, we do need to go over this. So wear and tear auto subs. You want to make sure you have these set because these tie into the actual auto subs and help the rotations be correct. If you forget one or the other, you are not going to have correct rotations. So for wear and tear, I left everything at default, but then I changed things as I wanted it. So for quarterbacks, it's going to be out at 10, in at 40. Halfbacks are out at 84, in at 88. For wide receivers, out at 70, in at 75. For tight ends, out at 65, in at 70. For offensive line, out at 1, in at 40. For linebackers, out at 65, in at 70. Defensive tackles, out at 82, in at 85. For defensive ends, same thing, out at 82, in at 85. Corners, out at 60, in at 65. For safeties, out at 60, in at 65. And we went over the regular auto sub. So you want to make sure you have that because the wear and tear plays a big part into the actual system through the whole year. Whether or not, players are constantly getting injured because they're too fatigued or whatever it is. You need to make sure you have that set. So make sure that you're setting all of the auto subs from the main menu for both wear and tear and the regular auto subs. All right, so yeah, we've reached the end of this franchise sanctum, is what I call it, where every number's been tested, tweaked, and tuned to tell a story. This isn't just gameplay, it's iconic and realistic football. And now, you can finally enjoy Madden 26, CPU versus CPU slow-sim franchise again. This will be the first time in years that you will see a game play out the way that you actually do on Sundays. So, enjoy. Again, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Make sure you subscribe to join the Night Watch, where we sit in the battle and rule the night together. Skol Vikings, and I will catch you guys on the next video. The stadium stands silent. The battlefield awaits. Shadows stir, legends awaken. Tonight, the clash begins. Join the Night Watch, and let's sim the battle and rule the night together. Welcome to Night Sims.